The high desert wind carried grit across the firing range, stinging exposed skin and rattling the flags mounted above the observation tower. Elena Kovacs stood at the edge of the assembled group, her fingers curled around the strap of her rifle case, watching the other trainees with careful eyes. They moved with easy confidence, shoulders squared, voices pitched to carry across the tarmac. Most of them had already introduced themselves, trading stories about previous deployments and training certifications she did not possess. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Nevada facility, turning the concrete into a shimmering mirror of heat. Sweat traced a line down her spine beneath the tactical shirt that still felt too new, too stiff. She had been standing here for 20 minutes while the lead instructor reviewed paperwork in the shade of the operations building, and already her muscles ached from holding herself so carefully still. Before we continue with Elena's journey, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen military families in your community who faced similar challenges. A burst of laughter erupted from a cluster of men near the equipment shed. One of them, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut so fresh his scalp showed pink at the edges, glanced in her direction. His gaze traveled from her face down to her boots and back up again, slow and assessing. He said something to his companions that Elena could not hear, but she watched their expressions shift, saw the smirks bloom across their faces. Her grip tightened on the rifle case. She had expected this, had prepared herself for it during the long drive across 3 states, rehearsing responses in her mind that sounded confident and capable. But standing here now, feeling their eyes on her like weights, the words she had practiced dissolved into nothing. The door to the operations building swung open with a metallic clang. Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks emerged, his face weathered to leather by decades under this same brutal sun. He moved with the economy of someone who had learned long ago not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. His eyes, pale blue and sharp as cut glass, swept across the assembled trainees. Everyone fell silent. Even the wind seemed to quiet in deference to his presence. Hendricks stepped down from the concrete pad and walked to the center of the group. He did not raise his voice when he spoke, but every word carried with perfect clarity. This facility, he explained, maintained the highest standards for precision marksmanship in the entire armed forces. The washout rate exceeded 70%. Most people who arrived here with confidence would leave with humility if they left with certification at all. His gaze found Elena, held there for 3 seconds that felt like 30, then moved on. The chief warrant officer outlined the schedule for the coming weeks. Physical conditioning at dawn. Classroom instruction on ballistics, wind reading, and range estimation. Live fire exercises in the afternoon when conditions proved most challenging. Everyone would be evaluated not just on their shooting, but on their ability to calculate, to adapt, and to perform under escalating pressure. He gestured toward the range behind him, where targets stood at distances marked by colored flags. 200 meters, 400, 800, and beyond that, barely visible in the heat shimmer, the extreme distance targets that separated the capable from the exceptional. Your first live fire assessment begins in 30 minutes, Hendricks said. Collect your assigned weapons from the armory. Familiarize yourselves with the equipment. When I call your name, you will have 5 shots to demonstrate your baseline capability. Questions will not be entertained. Excuses will not be tolerated. The group broke apart, moving toward the low building that housed the armory. Elena followed at a distance, watching how the others moved together in pairs and small groups, already forming alliances. The buzz-cut man walked alongside 2 others, their conversation animated, punctuated by gestures toward the distant targets. Inside the armory, the air felt 20 degrees cooler, dim after the glaring sunlight. Weapons lined the walls in precise rows, each one secured and tagged. A sergeant with a clipboard directed traffic, calling out names and pointing to specific rifles. When Elena approached, he checked his list twice before nodding toward a lightweight precision rifle in matte black. Kovacs, he said, you're assigned to Station 7. The sergeant's tone was neutral, professional, but she caught the slight emphasis on her name. the way his eyebrows rose a fraction. You checked qualified on your application with the Remington 700 platform, correct? Yes, she replied. Her voice came out steady despite the tightness in her chest. The sergeant handed her the rifle, along with a box of match-grade ammunition and a data book for recording her shots. Station 7 is on the north end of the line, he said. You'll be shooting at 200 meters for this assessment. Make sure your scope is properly zeroed before the evaluation begins. She carried the equipment outside, feeling the weight of the rifle in her hands. It was familiar and foreign at once. The balance was different from what she had trained with, the stock shape for different hands. But the fundamentals remained the same. Breath control, trigger discipline, follow-through. Station 7 sat at the far end of the firing line, separated from the others by 10 meters of empty space. Whether this was deliberate or coincidental, Elena could not say. She set up her equipment with methodical care, adjusting the rifle rest, arranging her ammunition, opening the data book to a fresh page. The other trainees were settling into their positions now, their voices carrying across the range in fragments of conversation. She heard someone mention a previous course at Fort Benning. Someone else laughed about a training mishap involving a misread wind call. They sounded relaxed, eager, ready to prove themselves. Elena pressed her cheek against the rifle stock and looked through the scope at the target 200 meters away. The crosshairs wavered slightly with her breathing. She made a small adjustment to the focus ring, bringing the target into sharp clarity. Behind her, Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks began calling names. The first shooter took his position. The crack of rifle fire split the desert air, sharp and clean. Then another shot. Another. The rhythm of the assessment had begun, and Elena knew that soon her name would be called, and everything she had worked for would be tested in front of people who had already decided what she was capable of achieving. The morning after her disastrous first assessment, Elena woke before dawn to the sound of boots on concrete outside her barracks room. Through the thin window, she could see the other trainees already assembling for the physical training session, their silhouettes dark against the purple sky. She dressed quickly, pulling on the same tactical clothing that still bore creases from the packaging, and joined the formation just as Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks emerged from the operations building. The run took them 5 miles into the desert, following a trail that wound between rock formations and dry creek beds. Elena kept pace near the back of the group, her breathing controlled, her stride steady. She had always been a strong runner, finding comfort in the rhythm of footfall and breath. But here, even this small competence felt hollow against the weight of yesterday's failure. When they returned to the facility, the sun had cleared the horizon, painting the buildings in sharp orange light. Hendricks called out instructions for the day's schedule. Classroom session at 0800. Equipment maintenance at 10. Live fire training in the afternoon heat, when the wind would be at its worst and the mirage effect would make range estimation nearly impossible. Tomas Ruiz fell in a step beside her as they walked toward the mess hall. You did better on that run than most of these guys, he said quietly. His tone was not mocking, just observational. Where did you train before this? Elena glanced at him, surprised by the direct question. Small town in Montana, she said. Lots of open country. He nodded as if this explained something. I grew up in West Texas. Similar terrain. Makes you appreciate long distances. They collected breakfast trays in silence, the mess hall filling with the noise of tired men trying to wake themselves up through conversation and black coffee. Elena found a seat at an empty table near the windows, and Tomas sat across from her without asking permission. For a few minutes they ate without speaking, and Elena felt grateful for the lack of questions. But the peace did not last long. Garrett Voss dropped his tray onto the table with a clatter that made everyone nearby look up. He slid onto the bench next to Tomas, his presence aggressive even in this simple action. His 2 constant companions, Keegan and Walsh, took positions on either side, boxing in their small corner of the room. So Kovacs, Voss said, his voice pitched to Carey. He wore a smile that did not reach his eyes. You planning to actually hit something today, or should we just mark you down for another 0? Keegan laughed, a harsh bark of sound. Maybe she needs prescription lenses in that scope. Can I even make them strong enough? Elena set down her fork carefully, keeping her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only fed people like Voss, gave them the reaction they wanted. I will do better today, she said simply. Voss leaned back, draping one arm across the back of the bench. That is what you said yesterday before you went out there and embarrassed yourself. His tone was almost friendly, which somehow made the words cut deeper. Look, no shame in washing out. This program is not for everyone. Some people just do not have what it takes for precision work. Walsh nodded in agreement. Maybe you should consider a different specialty. Supply chain management, communications, plenty of important roles that do not require you to actually, shoot straight. The table had gone quiet now, other conversations trailing off as people turned to watch. Elena felt the heat rising in her face despite her best efforts to remain calm. She met Voss's eyes directly, refusing to look away first. Tomas cleared his throat. Everyone has bad days, he said to the group. First assessment is always rough. Remember when you put 3 rounds into the dirt at Benning, Voss? That was week 1, right? Voss's smile vanished. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought he might lunge across the table. But then Hendrix's voice cut through the tension from across the mess hall, calling for everyone to finish up and report to the classroom building. The moment broke. Voss stood, grabbing his tray with enough force to make the plates rattle. Enjoy today, Kovacs, he said as he walked away. I will be sure to watch your performance. Should be entertaining. The classroom session covered environmental factors affecting long-range accuracy. Hendrix stood at the front of the room, using a laser pointer to highlight charts showing how temperature, humidity, and altitude affected bullet trajectory. Elena took notes with mechanical precision, filling pages of her notebook with calculations and formulas. This part she understood. The mathematics of ballistics followed logical rules, predictable patterns. Unlike people, numbers did not judge or mock. But even here, she could feel the weight of yesterday's failure. When Hendrix asked questions, hands shot up around the room, trainees eager to demonstrate their knowledge. Elena knew most of the answers, had studied these principles for months before arriving. But she kept her hand down, unwilling to draw attention, to give Voss and his friends more ammunition for their ridicule. The afternoon brought them back to the range, where the heat had transformed the air into something visible, thick, and wavering. Hendrix announced they would be working at 400 meters today, a significant jump from the previous day's 200. He explained the added complications, how the longer distance magnified every small error in technique or calculation. Elena drew Station 7 again, the isolated position at the end of the line. She went through her setup routine, checking and rechecking every element. The rifle felt more familiar now in her hands. The balance started to make sense. She made careful adjustments to her scope, accounting for the distance increase and the afternoon wind that pushed steadily from the southwest. Through her scope, the target at 400 meters looked impossibly small, the bullseye barely visible through the heat shimmer. She could hear the other trainees starting their strings of fire, the regular crack of shots echoing across the range. Some hits, some misses, the impacts visible as puffs of dust around the target frames. When Hendrix called her name, Elena settled into her shooting position. She forced everything else away, the memory of yesterday's humiliation, the weight of watching eyes, Voss's mocking voice. She focused on her breathing, slow and controlled. On the sight picture, the crosshairs floating just above the center of the target to account for bullet drop. On the trigger press, steady pressure straight back. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the impact, low and left of center. Not a complete miss like yesterday, but far from good. She worked the bolt, chambering another round, making mental calculations about the correction needed. Her second shot hit closer to center, but still outside the scoring rings. The third caught the edge of the target. The fourth and fifth were better, both finding the outer rings, but nothing that would impress anyone watching. When she finished, Elena stood and cleared her rifle, her hands steady even as disappointment settled heavy in her chest. She had improved from yesterday. but barely. Not enough to silence the doubters. Not enough to prove she belonged here. As she walked back from the line, she passed Voss heading to his station. He did not say anything, did not need to. The smirk on his face communicated everything. She was failing publicly and repeatedly, and everyone knew it. The question was no longer whether she would wash out, but when. The third week of training brought a new challenge that changed the entire dynamic of the course. Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks announced it during the morning formation, his voice carrying across the assembled trainees with the same flat authority he used for everything. They will be working in pairs now, he explained. Spotter and shooter combinations that would rotate daily, forcing everyone to develop both skill sets simultaneously. He read the assignments from his clipboard, calling out names in alphabetical order. When he reached Elena's name, there was a pause, long enough that several people turned to look at her. Then Hendricks continued, "Kovacs, you're paired with Voss." The words landed like a physical blow. Elena kept her expression neutral, but her stomach dropped. Of all the possible combinations, this was the worst. She glanced across the formation to where Voss stood and found him already looking at her, his face showing open displeasure at the assignment. The morning classroom session focused on spotter duties, the complex calculations required to provide accurate shooting solutions at extreme ranges. Elena absorbed the information with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, filling her notebook with formulas for calculating wind drift, elevation adjustments, and moving target leads. She understood the mathematics instinctively, could see how the variables interrelated and affected each other. When Hendricks posed a particularly complex problem to the class, asking them to calculate the required adjustment for a target at 1,200 meters with a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind at a 45-degree angle, Elena worked through it quickly in her notebook. The answer appeared clearly in her mind before she finished writing out the full equation. But she did not raise her hand, did not volunteer the solution. "Voss," Hendricks called out. "What do you have?" Voss looked up from his own calculations, confidence radiating from every line of his posture. "Approximately 7.2 minutes of angle right, sir," he said. Hendricks shook his head. "Wrong. Anyone else?" The room fell silent. Elena stared at her notebook, at the answer she had written. 6.8 minutes of angle. She was certain of it. But speaking up now would only draw more attention, more scrutiny, would give Voss another reason to resent her. "Kovacs," Hendricks said suddenly. His pale eyes had found her in the back of the room. "What is your answer?" There was no avoiding it now. 6.8 minutes of angle right, sir," she said quietly. Hendricks nodded. "Correct." He turned back to the board, writing out the full calculation for everyone to see. "Note the angle of the wind," he continued. "Full value crosswind would be 9 minutes, but at 45 degrees you multiply by 0.7. Basic trigonometry that everyone here should have mastered already." Elena felt the weight of attention shift across the room. She did not look up from her notebook, but she could sense Voss's anger radiating from 3 rows ahead. She had just corrected him in front of the entire class, had demonstrated knowledge he lacked. This would not be forgotten or forgiven. The afternoon brought them to the range for their first paired exercise. Elena and Voss reported to Station 7 together, the isolation of the position now feeling less like separation and more like exile. They were assigned to shoot at 600 meters, a distance that required precise calculation and communication between spotter and shooter. Voss would shoot first, with Elena acting as spotter. They set up their equipment in tense silence, each movement deliberate and careful. Elena settled behind the spotting scope, adjusting the focus until the target 600 meters away appeared in sharp detail. She pulled out her data book and began making notes about the conditions. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, all the factors that would affect the bullet's flight. "What is my solution?" Voss demanded. His tone made it clear this was not a request for assistance, but a test. Elena checked her calculations one more time. "Hold center," she said. "Wind is negligible at this angle. Elevation should be preset for 600. Voss did not acknowledge her words. He settled into his shooting position, his movements aggressive, lacking the fluid grace that marked truly skilled shooters. When he fired, Elena tracked the bullet impact through the spotting scope. "Miss," she reported. "Low and right, approximately 2 minutes." Voss worked his bull hard enough to make the action protest. "That cannot be right," he said. "You gave me the wrong solution." Elena kept her voice level. "The wind shifted after I gave you the call. It is gusting now from the southeast. You need to hold 1 minute left and add half a minute elevation." His second shot was closer, but still missed the scoring rings. The third caught the outer edge. By the fifth shot, he had only managed 2 hits, both barely on target. When he finished, he cleared his rifle with jerky movements and stood up without speaking. "Your turn," he said, moving to the spotting scope. His tone promised nothing good. Elena settled into the shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Through her scope, the target looked impossibly distant, the bullseye a tiny circle surrounded by vast, empty space. She steadied her breathing, waiting for Voss to provide her shooting solution. The silence stretched. She glanced over at him, found him staring through the spotting scope with deliberate intensity. "Voss," she prompted. "What is my call?" He did not look away from the scope. "Figure out yourself," he said flatly. "You are so smart. You do not need my help." Elena felt her pulse quicken. This was a violation of the training protocol, a deliberate sabotage. But calling it out would only create more conflict, would make her look like someone who could not handle the pressure. She turned back to her rifle, forced herself to think through the problem alone. The wind had shifted again, now coming more directly from the west. She estimated the speed at around 8 miles per hour, which would push the bullet right. She made a mental calculation, adjusted her point of aim, and took her first shot. Through the scope, she saw the impact, center mass of the target. A hit. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, made a tiny adjustment based on what she had learned from the first shot. The second bullet struck even closer to the bullseye. The third shot hit dead center. Behind her, she heard Voss shift position. When she glanced back, his face had gone rigid with barely contained anger. She had just made 3 consecutive good hits without his assistance, had demonstrated that she could calculate the solutions faster and more accurately than he could provide them. Her fourth shot opened up the group slightly, catching the inner ring but outside the 10-point circle. The fifth shot brought her back to center, another bullseye that would score maximum points. Elena cleared her rifle and stood, careful not to show any satisfaction. She had just posted the best score of her training so far, but the victory felt hollow. She could see in Voss's expression that she had not gained respect, only earned deeper enmity. They walked back from the firing line in hostile silence. Around them, other pairs were finishing their strings, voices calling out scores and solutions. Elena heard someone mention hitting 4 out of 5 at 600 meters, sounding pleased with the performance. She had hit all 5, 3 of them in the bullseye, but she said nothing. As they reached the equipment shed, Voss stopped and turned to face her. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "You think you are better than everyone here," he said. "You think one good string changes anything. But everyone saw you fail for 2 weeks straight. One decent performance does not erase that." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I am not trying to be better than anyone," she replied. "I'm trying to pass this course." Voss stepped closer, his physical presence aggressive. "You're not going to make it," he said. "By the time we get to the final evaluation, you'll have washed out, and everyone here will be glad to see you go." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone beside the shed. Through the equipment room window, she could see Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks making notes in his evaluation book. He glanced up once, his pale eyes finding her across the distance. His expression revealed nothing, but Elena wondered what he had seen, what he had noted about the hostile dynamic between her and Voss. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Elena collected her gear and headed back to the barracks, her mind already working through the calculations for tomorrow's training. She had proven today that she could shoot accurately when the pressure was on, but she had also made an enemy who would not rest until he found a way to destroy her chances of succeeding here. The 4th week began with an announcement that shifted the entire atmosphere of the training facility. Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks gathered everyone in the briefing room after the morning run, his expression more serious than usual. The final evaluation had been scheduled, he explained, for 2 weeks from today. Each trainee would be required to demonstrate proficiency at multiple distances, culminating in a cold bore shot at 1,000 meters. Cold bore meant no practice rounds, no opportunity to adjust based on initial impacts. One shot, one chance to prove competence. The washout rate at this stage typically reached 50%, Hendricks continued. Those who failed would be reassigned to other specialties. Those who passed would receive their precision marksman certification and move on to advanced training. There would be no second chances, no appeals, no extensions. Elena felt the weight of those words settle over the room like a physical presence. Around her, the other trainees shifted in their seats, sudden tension visible in shoulders and jawlines. This was what everything had been building toward. All the morning runs, the classroom calculations, the afternoon sessions in the brutal heat. Everything came down to one evaluation that would determine who had earned the right to continue and who would be sent away in failure. After the briefing, Elena headed to the range for individual practice time. Several other trainees had the same idea, but the facility was large enough that everyone could work without crowding. She claimed Station 7 out of habit now, the isolated position having become her default space. She set up for 800 meters, a distance she had only attempted once before in training. Through her scope, the target looked impossibly small, barely more than a speck against the brown earth. The morning wind had not yet built to its afternoon intensity, but she could see the flags along the range stirring and shifting, indicating variable conditions. She made her calculations carefully, accounting for distance, wind, temperature, and the slight uphill angle of the shot. Her first attempt missed completely. The second caught the edge of the target frame, but outside the scoring area. She forced herself to slow down, to analyze each miss systematically rather than rushing to the next shot. By her 10th attempt, she had started finding the target consistently, though her group size remained too large for the precision required at this distance. A shadow fell across her position. She looked up to find Master Sergeant Chun standing behind her, arms crossed, watching with an evaluative expression. Chun ran the range operations and rarely spoke to individual trainees unless there was a problem or an equipment issue. "You are fighting the rifle," Chun observed. His voice was neutral, matter of fact, trying to muscle the shot instead of letting the fundamentals work. Elena sat back from her shooting position, uncertain how to respond. She had not realized anyone was watching, had thought she was alone out here with her failures. Chun stepped closer, gestured toward her rifle. "May I?" She nodded, moving aside. Chun settled into the shooting position with the fluid ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He made several small adjustments to the rifle setup, moving the rear bag slightly, repositioning the scope. Then he pressed his cheek to the stock and went still, his breathing deep and regular. The shot cracked out across the range. Through the spotting scope, Elena saw the impact dead center of the target at 800 meters. Chun stood and handed her back the rifle. "The fundamentals never change," he said, "regardless of distance. Natural point of aim, breathing, trigger control. You are thinking too much about the calculation and not enough about the execution." He walked away before she could thank him, leaving her alone with his words. She settled back into position, made the adjustments he had shown her, and tried again. This time the shot felt different, smoother, more natural. The impact was closer to center than any of her previous attempts. Over the next hour, she worked through 2 boxes of ammunition, each shot teaching her something new about reading wind at extended distances, about trusting her calculations while staying relaxed in the shooting position. By the time the afternoon heat made the mirage too severe to continue, she had posted several groups that would have passed the evaluation standard. That evening in the barracks, Elena lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying every shot from the day. She could hear other trainees talking in the common area, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Someone mentioned the final evaluation, the 1,000-meter cold bore shot that everyone feared. Another voice laughed nervously, said something about hoping for calm wind conditions. Her phone buzzed with a message. She pulled it out, saw her mother's name on the screen. "Just checking in, honey. Hope training is going well. Miss you." Elena stared at the message for a long moment. Her mother knew she was attending a precision shooting course, but did not know the details, did not understand the pressure or the stakes. She typed back a brief response. "Doing fine. Challenging, but learning a lot. Miss you too." What she did not mention was the constant weight of proving herself, the mockery that had only intensified as her performance improved. Voss had been telling anyone who would listen that her recent success was luck, that she would collapse under the pressure of the final evaluation. Several other trainees had started avoiding her, not out of malice, but out of the superstitious belief that failure might be contagious. The next morning brought a new training evolution. Hendricks announced they would be working at maximum distances today, practicing at the 1,000-meter line where the final evaluation would take place. Only 5 shooting positions were available at this distance, which meant they would rotate through in groups, spending most of the time observing and learning from each other's attempts. Elena found herself in the 3rd rotation, which gave her nearly 2 hours to watch the others shoot. She paid careful attention to wind calls and impacts, noting which corrections seemed to work and which led shooters astray. The wind at 1,000 meters behaved differently than at shorter ranges, the bullet spending enough time in flight that conditions could shift during its travel. Voss shot in the 1st rotation. He posted 3 hits out of 5 attempts, a respectable performance that earned him nods of approval from several observers. When he walked back from the line, he made a point of passing close to where Elena sat. "That is how it is done," he said, his voice pitched for her alone. "When the pressure is on, real shooters perform. We will see how you handle it." When her turn came, Elena approached the shooting position with her pulse hammering in her throat. She had never attempted a shot at this distance with people watching, evaluating, waiting for her to fail. The target looked microscopic through her scope, barely visible even at maximum magnification. She went through her pre-shot routine with deliberate care, checking and rechecking every variable. The wind was gusting from the northwest at approximately 12 miles per hour, but the flag along the range showed it was stronger at mid-distance than at either end. She calculated the required correction, adjusted her point of aim, and settled into her final shooting position. The rifle bucked. Through the scope, she watched for the impact, scanning the area around the target. For 3 seconds, she saw nothing, thought she had missed completely. Then a puff of dust appeared, low and left, just catching the outer edge of the target frame. Her second shot was closer, but still outside the scoring rings. The third missed high. By the 4th attempt, frustration was building in her chest, making her breathing less controlled, her trigger press less smooth. She forced herself to pause, to reset mentally before taking the 5th and final shot. This one found the target, catching the outer scoring ring. 1 out of 5, barely passing by the evaluation standards, and only because they allowed the outer rings to count at this extreme distance. She cleared her rifle and walked back from the line, avoiding eye contact with anyone watching. She had performed adequately, but not impressively. Had proven she could hit at 1,000 meters, but had not demonstrated the consistency that marked true competence. Tomas fell in a step beside her as they walked back toward the equipment shed. "That was not as bad as you think," he said quietly. "First time at 1,000 meters for most people looks like that. You will dial it in with more practice." Elena appreciated his attempt at encouragement, but could not shake the feeling that time was running out. The final evaluation loomed just 2 weeks away, and she was still struggling at the very distance where she would be judged most critically. Around her, other trainees were succeeding, posting scores that demonstrated their readiness. She was improving, but improvement might not be enough if she could not deliver when the moment arrived that would determine whether she stayed or left in failure. The weekend brought no relief from training. Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks made it clear that with the final evaluation approaching, every available hour should be spent preparing. The facility remained open for individual practice, and Elena found herself at the range both days, working through ammunition and calculations until her shoulder ached from recoil and her eyes burned from hours behind the scope. Saturday afternoon, she was alone at Station 7 when she noticed something odd about her rifle's performance. Her shots at 600 meters were grouping well, but there was a consistent pattern of impacts landing slightly right of where her calculations predicted. She checked her scope mounting, her zero. Everything she could think of that might explain the deviation. Nothing seemed wrong, yet the pattern persisted. Master Sergeant Chun appeared again, seemingly materializing from nowhere as he had before. He stood watching her shoot for several minutes without speaking, his experienced eyes tracking her technique and the resulting impacts. When she paused to reload, Chun stepped forward. "Your scope rings are loose," he said flatly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to allow shift under recoil. Elena felt her stomach drop. How long had this been happening? How many of her previous misses had been equipment failure rather than her own errors? Chun produced a torque wrench from his kit and methodically tightened each screw to the proper specification, checking his work twice. "Test it now," he said. She fired 3 shots at 600 meters. All 3 impacted exactly where her calculations predicted, forming a tight group around the bullseye. The difference was immediately apparent. Chun nodded with satisfaction. "Always check your equipment first," he said, "before you start questioning your fundamentals. A loose scope ring has ended more shooting careers than bad technique ever has." He walked away again, leaving Elena to process this revelation. How many times had she doubted herself, assumed the fault was in her execution when the problem was mechanical? How many opportunities to succeed have been stolen by something as simple as loose screws? The anger that rose in her chest was complicated, directed partly at herself for not catching the issue sooner, partly at the general unfairness of fighting both equipment problems and social hostility simultaneously. Sunday brought a different kind of challenge. Hendricks announced a stress shoot for the afternoon, designed to simulate the pressure of the final evaluation. Each trainee would have exactly 3 minutes to engage targets at 3 different distances, 200, 600, and 1,000 meters, with only 1 shot per target. Speed, accuracy, and composure under time pressure would all be evaluated. The trainees drew numbers to determine shooting order. Elena pulled number 18 out of 22, which meant she would spend most of the afternoon watching others either succeed or fail. She used the time to study wind conditions, to see which calls worked at different distances, to mentally rehearse her own approach. Voss shot in the early group. He moved with aggressive confidence, engaging each target quickly and efficiently. All 3 shots found their marks, earning him one of the best times and scores of the day. When he walked past Elena afterward, his expression said everything. He had set a standard that would be difficult to match. Tomas shot in the middle group. His approach was more methodical, taking time to ensure each calculation was correct before engaging. He hit the 200 and 600-meter targets solidly, but his 1,000-meter shot missed just left, catching nothing but dirt. He accepted the result with quiet disappointment, nodding to himself as he cleared his rifle and stepped away from the line. When Elena's number was called, she moved to the firing position with her pulse hammering in her ears. Hendricks stood nearby with a stopwatch, his face expressionless. 3 minutes, he said. Beginning now. She engaged the 200-meter target first, the closest and easiest. The fundamentals came automatically now after weeks of repetition. Breath control, natural point of aim, smooth trigger press. The shot broke clean, and she watched the impact, center mass of the target. 1 down. She transitioned to the 600-meter target, working quickly but not rushing. The wind had shifted slightly since the last shooter, now quartering from the west instead of straight on. She made the mental adjustment, corrected her point of aim, and fired. Another solid hit in the scoring rings. 2 targets down, 1 to go, and she had used just over 90 seconds. Plenty of time for the 1,000-meter shot if she did not panic or second-guess herself. She made the scope adjustment for distance, checked the wind flags along the range, and ran through the calculations. The wind was the critical variable at this distance, capable of pushing the bullet several feet off course if she misjudged the correction. She settled into her shooting position, forcing her breathing to slow despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Through the scope, the 1,000-meter target looked impossibly distant, shimmering in the afternoon heat. She made her final wind call, adjusted her hold, and pressed the trigger. The rifle recoiled. She stayed on the scope, watching for impact. Seconds ticked by, feeling like minutes. Then she saw it, a puff of dust just right of the target, missing by what looked like 6 inches. "Time!" Hendricks called out. "Clear your weapon." Elena worked the bolt, visually and physically verifying the chamber was empty, then stood and stepped away from the firing line. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight with disappointment. 2 hits and 1 near miss. Good but not great. Better than some, worse than others. She walked back to join the waiting group, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Tomas gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. One shooter to another who understood how close success and failure lived at extreme distances. But Vasa's expression held obvious satisfaction. She had performed well, but had not matched his perfect score, had given him ammunition to claim superiority. The remaining shooters completed their runs with mixed results. Several matched Elena's performance with 2 hits and a miss. A few managed only 1 hit or none at all, their stress showing in rush calculations and poor execution. By the end of the evolution, only 4 shooters had hit all 3 targets, Voss among them. Hendricks gathered everyone for his debrief. His analysis was characteristically blunt. "Half of you would fail the final evaluation if I administered it today," he said. The stress shoot revealed who can maintain composure under pressure and who falls apart when the clock is running. You have 1 week to fix whatever broke down today. That evening, Elena sat in the barracks, cleaning her rifle with meticulous care, running patches through the barrel until they came out spotless. Her mind kept replaying that 1,000-meter shot, analyzing what had gone wrong. The wind call had been close, but not quite right. She had held for 10-mile-per-hour wind when conditions were probably closer to 12. A small error at the shooting position that became a large miss at the target. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her mother, asking if she could call sometime this week. Elena stared at the screen, imagining trying to explain what she was going through. Her mother would be supportive, would say all the encouraging things mothers say. But she would not understand the specific pressure of this environment, the way every shot carried the weight of proving she deserved to be here. She typed back a quick response. "Training is intense right now. Final evaluation coming up. We'll call after is over." Through the thin walls, she could hear Voss in the common area, his voice carrying as he recounted his perfect performance on the stress shoot. Someone laughed, made a comment about showing everyone how it was done. Another voice joined in, talking about the final evaluation, about how certain people were definitely going to wash out when the pressure peaked. Elena set down her phone and returned to cleaning her rifle, her hands moving through the familiar motions. The weapon was perfect now, every screw torqued to specification, every surface cleaned and lubricated. The equipment would not fail her. The question was whether she could trust herself to execute when everything was on the line, when one cold bore shot at 1,000 meters would determine if she stayed or left. Outside, the desert sunset painted the sky in violent shades of orange and red. The wind that had plagued her all day finally began to settle, flags hanging limp in the still evening air. In 1 week, she would face the final evaluation. In 1 week, she would discover if all the struggle and doubt and determination had been enough. In 1 week, she would either prove Voss and all the others wrong, or she would confirm their assessment that she never belonged here in the first place. The final week of training began with an atmosphere of barely controlled tension. Everyone felt it. The way conversations became shorter and more focused, the way trainees stopped joking during meals and instead reviewed databooks and wind formulas. The final evaluation loomed 3 days away, and Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks had made it clear there would be no extensions, no excuses, no second chances for anyone who failed to meet the standard. Monday morning brought a surprise. Hendricks announced they would be conducting night shoots. something that had not been part of the regular training curriculum. Darkness added complexity to everything, he explained. Judging wind became harder without visible flags. Reading mirage was impossible. Everything depended on calculations made from limited information and trust in fundamentals developed during daylight hours. They drew partners for the evolution. Elena found herself paired with Tomas this time, a relief after the hostile pairing with Voss. They collected their equipment as the sun set, painting the desert in deep purples and oranges before fading to black. Powerful spotlights illuminated the targets at various distances, but the space between shooting position and impact point remained dark, invisible. Elena would shoot first, with Tomas acting as spotter. They set up at Station 7, now barely visible in the darkness beyond the range lights. The night air felt different than daytime, cooler and somehow more intimate, the usual vast openness of the desert compressed into the small pool of light where they worked. Wind is harder to read at night, Tomas said quietly, checking the wind meter. No visual reference except these flags, and you cannot see how the wind changes at mid-range. You have to trust the data and your calculations more than your eyes. Elena nodded, settling behind her rifle. The target at 400 meters glowed white under the spotlight, looking oddly two-dimensional without the usual depth perception daylight provided. She made her calculations based on the wind data Tomas provided, adjusted her scope, and took her first shot. The impact appeared as a dark spot against the white target face. Hit, Tomas confirmed through the spotting scope. Outer ring, 9 o'clock position. She made her correction and fired again. This shot struck closer to center. By her 5th round, she had established a rhythm, trusting the process even when her eyes told her nothing about the space between rifle and target. For out of 5 hits, better than she had expected under these strange conditions. They switched positions. Elena took over the spotting scope while Tomas prepared to shoot. She called wind conditions and provided solutions, watching his impacts through the scope. He was a consistent shooter, methodical and careful, and he posted similar results to hers. As they worked, Elena became aware of activity at the other shooting positions. Voices carried across the dark range, some frustrated, others satisfied. Not everyone was adapting well to the night conditions. She heard someone curse as they missed completely, heard another shooter ask for a 3rd spotting scope because they could not see their impacts. Tuesday brought them back to daylight, and the announcement everyone had been waiting for. The final evaluation would take place Thursday morning, starting at 0800 hours. Hendricks read off the sequence of events with his usual flat precision. Physical fitness test at dawn. Written exam on ballistics and environmental factors at 0700. Live fire evaluation beginning at 0800, proceeding through multiple distances and culminating in the cold bore shot at 1,000 meters. Only those who passed every element would receive their certification, he continued. Physical fitness standards were non-negotiable. The written exam required 90% or better. The live fire evaluation demanded consistent accuracy across all distances, with a 1,000-meter cold bore shot carrying double weight in the final scoring. Elena spent Tuesday afternoon at the range, but for the first time in weeks, she limited herself to just 2 boxes of ammunition. Master Sergeant Shun had mentioned once that overtraining before a major evaluation could be as damaging as undertraining, that shooters needed to trust their preparation rather than desperately cramming in more practice. She shot at 600 meters, focusing on process rather than results, then cleaned her rifle thoroughly and returned to the barracks. That evening, she sat at the small desk in her room and opened the battered notebook she had been carrying since her arrival. The pages were filled with calculations, wind formulas, notes from Hendricks's lectures, observations about her own shooting tendencies. Near the back, she found a section she had not looked at in weeks, notes she had made before arriving at the facility. Her father's lessons, written in her own hand, recording everything he had taught her during those long afternoons on the Montana ranch. How to read wind by watching grass movement at multiple distances. How to calculate density altitude and its effect on trajectory. How to maintain composure when a shot mattered most. He had been preparing her for this, she realized, even though he had never explicitly said so. The memory rose unbidden, sharp and clear. Her father behind the spotting scope, his voice calm and patient. "Shooting is not about forcing the shot to go where you want it," he had said. "It is about creating the conditions where the shot wants to go there naturally. Trust the process, trust your preparation, and let the fundamentals work." She had been 16 then, angry about missing a target at 700 meters, frustrated with herself for not being as good as he was. He had smiled at her frustration, not mocking, but understanding. "You are trying to shoot like me," he had said. "You need to shoot like you. Find your own rhythm, your own process. The fundamentals stay the same, but the execution is personal." Elena closed the notebook and stared at the wall. Tomorrow was Wednesday, one day before the evaluation that would determine everything. She felt oddly calm now, the desperate anxiety of the previous weeks replaced by something more solid. She had done the work, had struggled and improved and learned, had faced mockery and equipment failure and self-doubt. Whatever happened on Thursday, she would step to the line knowing she had prepared as well as she could. Wednesday morning felt surreal. The usual training schedule was suspended, replaced by equipment checks and final preparation. Elena verified every component of her rifle setup, torquing every screw, checking zero at 200 meters with just 3 carefully placed shots. All 3 hit center mass. The rifle was perfect, the equipment reliable. She spent the afternoon reviewing her data book one final time, not trying to memorize new information, but reinforcing patterns she had already internalized. Wind behaviors at different distances. Temperature effects on trajectory. The small adjustments that separated good shots from great ones. By late afternoon, she felt saturated with information, unable to absorb anything more. That evening, Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks called a final formation. His speech was brief and characteristically blunt. Tomorrow would separate those who earned the title of precision marksman from those who had merely attended the course. The evaluation would be fair but unforgiving. Performance under pressure was the only metric that mattered. "Some of you will succeed tomorrow," he said, his pale eyes scanning across the assembled trainees. "Some will fail. Both outcomes are acceptable. What is not acceptable is failing because you did not trust your preparation, because you let doubt override your training. You have all been given the same instruction, the same opportunities. Now we discover who internalized the lessons and who was just going through motions." He dismissed them without ceremony. Elena walked back to the barracks through the desert evening, the air finally cooling after another brutal day of heat. Around her, other trainees moved in small groups, their conversations quiet and serious. The usual bravado had been replaced by contemplation, everyone facing the reality of tomorrow's test. In her room, Elena laid out her equipment for the morning. Rifle cleaning kit, data book, weather meter, ammunition, everything organized and ready. She set 3 alarms on her phone, knowing sleep would be difficult but necessary. Then she lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, her mind refusing to quiet despite her exhaustion. She thought about her father, about the hours he had spent teaching her to shoot, never explaining why it mattered so much to him that she learned this skill. She thought about her mother's worried voice on the phone, asking if everything was okay, sensing the stress even through brief text messages. She thought about Voss and his certainty that she would fail, about Tomas and his quiet support, about Master Sergeant Shun and his unexpected guidance. Most of all, she thought about tomorrow, about standing at the 1,000-meter line with everyone watching, with one cold bore shot that would carry more weight than anything she had done in her life. About the moment when all the preparation and doubt and determination would collapse into a single trigger press and whatever resulted from it. Sleep came eventually, fitful and populated by dreams of wind flags and distant targets. When her first alarm sounded in the darkness before dawn, Elena woke with her heart already racing, knowing that in just a few hours, everything would be decided. The desert sky was still dark when Elena joined the formation for the physical fitness test. Stars faded overhead as the 22 remaining trainees lined up in front of Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks. their breath visible in the cold morning air. 3 trainees had already washed out during the previous weeks, unable to maintain the pace or the standards. Now the rest would discover if they could pass this first gate of the final evaluation. The run covered 5 miles through the desert, the same route they had taken dozens of times during training. But this morning felt different, weighted with consequence. Elena settled into her rhythm quickly, finding a comfortable pace that she could sustain. Around her, other runners spread out along the trail, each person locked into their own battle with distance and fatigue. She finished in the top third of the group, her time well under the maximum allowed. Voss crossed the line 2 minutes ahead of her, barely breathing hard, his physical conditioning as solid as his shooting skills. Tomas came in shortly after Elena, looking tired but satisfied. 2 other trainees failed to meet the time standard and were dismissed immediately, their final evaluation ending before the shooting portion even began. The written exam took place in the classroom building. 20 remaining trainees hunched over test papers in tense silence. Elena worked through the questions methodically, finding comfort in the precision of mathematics and physics. Calculate the trajectory adjustment for a 10-degree temperature change. Determine wind drift at 800 meters with a 15-mile-per-hour full-value crosswind. Explain the relationship between humidity and bullet drag. She finished with 10 minutes remaining and used the time to check her work, verifying calculations twice. When Hendricks collected the papers, his expression revealed nothing about how anyone had performed. Results would be posted before the live fire evaluation began, he explained. Anyone who failed to achieve 90% would be dismissed and would not proceed to the range. The 20 minutes waiting for results felt longer than the entire exam. Elena stood outside the classroom building with the others, watching Hendricks grade papers in his office through the window. Some trainees paced nervously. Others sat against the wall with their eyes closed, trying to conserve energy for what lay ahead. Voss stood apart from the group, arms crossed, supremely confident. Finally, Hendricks emerged with a single sheet of paper. He posted it on the board without ceremony and stepped back. The group surged forward to read the results. Elena waited, letting others check first, dreading what she might find. When she finally looked, she found her name in the passing column with a score of 94%. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by renewed anxiety about the shooting portion still to come. Voss had scored 98%, the highest mark. Tomas had 92. 3 more trainees had failed to meet the standard and were dismissed, their expressions showing devastation as they walked away from the board. 17 trainees remained. They collected their equipment and moved to the range, where targets were already set up at multiple distances. The morning sun was climbing now, beginning to heat the air, and Elena could see flags along the range already stirring with the first hints of wind. Hendricks gathered them at the observation tower and explained the evaluation sequence. Each shooter would engage targets at 200, 400, 600, and 800 meters, with 5 shots at each distance. Minimum passing score required hitting at least 4 out of 5 shots at each distance. After completing the standard distances, they would move to the 1,000-meter line for the cold bore shot, single round, pass, or fail. The shooting order would be alphabetical by last name. Elena checked the roster and felt her stomach tighten. She would shoot fourth, early enough that she would not have to endure hours of waiting, but not so early that the range conditions would be at their easiest. The first shooter was Brendan Adler, a quiet trainee from Oregon who had posted consistent scores throughout the course. He moved through the evaluation with steady precision, hitting 4 out of 5 at each distance. Solid performance that demonstrated competence without brilliance. The second shooter struggled at 600 meters, managing only 3 hits, and was eliminated immediately. The third shooter passed all distances comfortably. Then Hendricks called Elena's name. She moved to Station 7, now feeling less like isolation and more like her territory. She set up her equipment with practiced efficiency, every movement rehearsed 100 times. The 200-meter target looked absurdly close after weeks of working at longer distances. She engaged it almost casually, putting all 5 rounds into the scoring rings without difficulty. 400 meters require more attention, but still fell within her comfort zone. 5 for 5, impacts clustered near center. She was shooting well, her confidence building with each successful string. 600 meters brought the first real challenge. The wind had picked up slightly, flags showing variable conditions. She took her time between shots, reading each change, adjusting her hold accordingly. 4 hits and 1 miss that caught the edge of the target frame. Still passing, but closer than she wanted. 800 meters pushed her to the edge of her capabilities. The wind was gusting now, harder to predict. Her first shot missed completely. She forced herself to slow down, to trust her training despite the miss. The next 4 shots all found the target, though none hit center. 4 out of 5, barely passing the standard. She cleared her rifle and stepped away from the line, her hand steady but her heart pounding. She had passed the preliminary distances. Now came the moment that would determine everything. The remaining shooters worked through their strings over the next 2 hours. Voss posted perfect scores at all distances, 20 hits out of 20 shots, his execution flawless. Tomas passed comfortably with 1 miss at 800 meters. 4 more trainees were eliminated for failing to meet standards at various distances. By midday, only 12 trainees remained for the final test. They gathered at the 1,000-meter line, where a single shooting position had been set up facing the most distant target on the range. The wind was steady now from the northwest, flags indicating approximately 10 miles per hour. Heat shimmer made the target waver and dance, barely visible even through high magnification scopes. Hendricks explained the final evolution with characteristic brevity. 1 shot per shooter. Cold bore, meaning no practice rounds to gauge conditions. Hit anywhere on the target face to pass. Miss completely and fail the entire evaluation, regardless of previous performance. They would shoot in the order they had finished the preliminary distances, which meant Voss would go first and Elena would be somewhere in the middle of the pack. Voss approached the shooting position with visible confidence. He took less than 2 minutes to set up, made his calculations quickly, and fired. Through the spotting scope, Elena watched the impact appear near the center of the target. The small crowd of observers murmured appreciation. Voss had passed, his certification assured. The next shooter took longer to prepare, but also hit the target solidly. The third shooter missed by 3 feet, his expression crumbling as Hendricks marked his evaluation sheet with a red line. Eliminated after making it this far. 2 more shooters hit. 1 missed. The pressure mounted with each attempt, the stakes clear in every face. Elena watched each shot, learning what she could about the wind conditions, seeing which corrections worked and which did not. But she also knew that conditions could change in seconds at this distance, that what worked for one shooter might be completely wrong for the next. Tomas stepped to the line. He went through his setup with meticulous care, taking nearly 4 minutes before settling into his final shooting position. The shot cracked out across the range. Long seconds passed before the impact appeared, low but on the target face. He had passed. Relief was visible in the tension draining from his shoulders. Hendricks called the next name, then the next. More hits than misses so far, but each failure served as a reminder of how unforgiving this test was. 1 shot, 1 moment, everything riding on execution under maximum pressure. Then Hendricks looked at his clipboard and called out the name Elena had been simultaneously dreading and anticipating. "Kovacs, you are up." Elena walked to the shooting position with her rifle, each step feeling both too fast and too slow. Behind her, she could sense the weight of watching eyes. The other trainees who had already shot, some passed and relieved, others failed and bitter. Those still waiting for their turn, analyzing her approach for clues about wind conditions. Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks with his clipboard and red pen. Master Sergeant Chun observing from the tower. Everyone watching to see if she would succeed or become another name marked with failure. She set her rifle on the rest and began her setup routine. Her hands moved through the familiar motions automatically, muscle memory developed over thousands of repetitions. Adjust the rear bag. Check the scope mounting. Verify the bolt cycles smoothly. Each action gave her something to focus on besides the enormity of what she was about to attempt. The 1,000-meter target looked impossibly distant through her scope, shimmering in the midday heat like a mirage. She made herself breathe slowly, deliberately, fighting the adrenaline that wanted to speed everything up. This was just another shot, she told herself. The same fundamentals she had practiced countless times. Distance did not change the basics, only magnified the consequences of error. She pulled out her data book and began recording the environmental conditions. Temperature was 92 degrees. Humidity was low, typical for the desert. Barometric pressure was standard. The critical variable was wind, and she spent nearly a minute watching the flags at various distances along the range. The wind was steady from the northwest at what looked like 10 miles per hour, maybe slightly more. But she had watched enough shots today to know the wind at mid-range was often different from what the flag showed at the firing line. Elena ran through her calculations twice, checking the math carefully. At 1,000 meters, even a small error in wind estimation could push the bullet several feet off target. She calculated the correction for 10-mile-per-hour wind, then adjusted slightly upward, trusting her observation that conditions were probably closer to 11. She settled behind the rifle, pressing her cheek firmly against the stock. Through the scope, the target filled her view, but the heat shimmer made it waver like something seen underwater. She forced herself to ignore the distortion, to trust her calculations over what her eyes were telling her. Her breathing slowed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, each breath deeper and more controlled than the last. She found her natural point of aim, that place where the rifle wanted to point naturally without her forcing it. The crosshairs floated over the center of the target, drifting slightly with her heartbeat. She began the trigger press. Steady pressure straight back. No jerking, no anticipation. The rifle had a 3-pound trigger, and she knew exactly what that weight felt like after weeks of practice. 1 pound. 2 pounds. Almost there. The shot broke with a clarity that surprised her, the rifle recoiling smoothly against her shoulder. She stayed on the scope, watching for impact, her breathing suspended. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. The bullet was in flight somewhere between her position and that distant target, subject to all the variables she had tried to calculate, all the forces she could not control. 3 seconds. Still nothing. Had she missed completely? The thought sent a spike of panic through her chest. Then the impact appeared, a small puff of dust on the target face, right side, just inside the edge. A hit. Barely, marginally, but definitively on target. Elena let out the breath she had been holding and cleared her rifle, her hands moving through the safety procedures automatically. She stood and stepped away from the shooting position, her legs suddenly unsteady. She had passed. After weeks of doubt and struggle and mockery, she had passed the evaluation. Behind her, she heard Hendricks mark something on his clipboard. "Kovacs pass," he said in his flat voice, making it sound no more significant than a weather report. Next shooter. Elena walked back toward the observation area on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Tomas caught her eye and gave a slight nod, the minimal gesture somehow conveying more than words could. She had done it. She belonged here after all. But as she joined the group of trainees who had already completed their shots, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. Voss was staring at her with an expression of barely contained anger. His perfect scores throughout the evaluation, his flawless cold-bore shot, none of it mattered now that she had also passed. She had proven him wrong, demonstrated that she deserved to be here despite his predictions of her failure. The remaining shooters completed their attempts over the next 20 minutes. 2 more hits, 1 more miss. When the last trainee cleared his rifle, Hendricks tallied the final results. 9 trainees had passed the complete evaluation out of the 17 who had made it to the live fire portion. 8 had failed at various stages, eliminated by the unforgiving standards. The 9 who passed lined up in front of Hendricks for his final assessment. His pale eyes moved across them slowly, evaluating one last time. "You have met the minimum standard for precision marksman certification," he said. Note that I said minimum. Passing this course means you are qualified to continue training not that you have mastered the craft. Real competence comes from years of practice, not weeks of instruction. He handed each of them a folder containing their certification documents and evaluation scores. Elena opened hers and scanned the numbers. She had passed every element, though several by narrow margins. Her 1,000-meter cold bore shot was listed as a pass with a note edge hit, right side. Not impressive, but sufficient. Voss's folder showed perfect or near-perfect scores in every category. When he looked at Elena, his expression made it clear that he considered her barely qualified performance an insult to the certification they were both receiving. In his mind, they were not equals despite both passing the same evaluation. The ceremony ended without fanfare. Hendricks dismissed them with instructions to collect their personal gear and report to the administration building for out-processing by 1600 hours. The precision marksman course was complete. Some would go on to advanced sniper training. Others would return to their regular units with the new certification added to their records. All of them would leave this place different from how they had arrived. Elena walked back to the barracks alone, her certification folder tucked under one arm. She should feel triumphant, she thought. Should feel vindicated after weeks of proving herself against constant doubt. But instead, she felt strangely empty, the accomplishment somehow smaller than she had imagined it would be. In her room, she packed her gear methodically, folding clothing and organizing equipment. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother asking how everything went. Elena stared at the screen, trying to compose a response that would capture what the past weeks had meant. Finally, she typed simply, "I passed. We'll call you tonight with details." As she continued packing, her eyes fell on the notebook containing her father's lessons. She picked it up and flipped through the pages, seeing his influence in every formula and technique she had internalized. He had prepared her for this without her fully understanding why it mattered so much to him. Now, holding her certification, she wondered if he had always known she would need these skills, had seen something in her that required this particular form of training. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting her small room in golden light. In a few hours, she would leave this facility and probably never return. The range where she had struggled and improved would train other shooters who would face their own challenges. Station 7 would be occupied by someone else fighting their own battles against doubt and distance. But for now, she sat on her bunk with her certification folder and her father's notebook, feeling the weight of what she had accomplished and wondering what came next. She had proven she could shoot at long distance under pressure, had demonstrated she could survive in an environment designed to eliminate the weak or unprepared, had earned respect, however grudging, from those who had expected her to fail. The question that lingered was what this certification meant beyond the piece of paper, beyond the temporary satisfaction of passing an evaluation. Her journey through this course had revealed something about herself, some capacity for persistence under adversity that she had not fully recognized before. Whatever happened next, wherever her career took her, she would carry that knowledge forward. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Tomas standing in the hallway, his own gear already packed and ready. "A few of us are getting food in town before heading out," he said, celebrating making it through. "You should come." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "That sounds good," she said. "Give me 10 minutes to finish packing." As she closed the door and returned to her remaining gear, she felt something shift inside her, the emptiness filling with a quieter satisfaction. She had passed, had earned her place, and that was enough for now. The celebration dinner in town was subdued. 9 tired shooters sitting around a table at a steakhouse, their conversation quiet and reflective. They had all passed the same evaluation, but had taken different paths to reach that point. Some, like Voss, had dominated from the start. Others, like Elena, had struggled and scraped their way through. But now they all held the same certification, and that fact created a strange equality that had not existed during training. Tomas raised his glass of water in a toast. "To making it through," he said, "and to everyone who pushed us to be better, whether we liked it at the time or not." They drank to that, and then conversation fragmented into smaller discussions. Voss sat at the far end of the table, talking with two other top performers about advanced sniper school applications. Elena sat between Tomas and a trainee named Marcus who had barely passed the evaluation but was clearly relieved to have made it. "What are you doing next?" Marcus asked her. "Going for advanced training or heading back to your unit?" Elena had not decided yet. The certification opened doors to specialized roles, but each path came with its own challenges and commitments. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Probably going to take some leave first and figure it out." "Smart," Tomas said. "This course burns people out. Good to reset before making big decisions." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Elena found her attention wandering. Through the restaurant window, she could see the desert stretching away under the evening sky, the same landscape she had stared at for weeks. It looked different now, less hostile, almost beautiful in the fading light. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. The preview showed only the beginning. "Elena Kovacs, this is Colonel Sarah Hendricks from Special Operations Command. Your name was forwarded to me by CWO Hendricks regarding." She opened the full message, her pulse quickening. The text continued, "Regarding your performance in the Precision Marksman course, we have an opening for a specialized role that requires someone with your particular skill set and background. If you're interested in discussing this opportunity, please call me at the number below at your earliest convenience." Time sensitive. Elena read the message twice, trying to process what it meant. A colonel from Special Operations Command had reached out to her specifically. Time sensitive implied this was more than a routine recruitment. She glanced around the table, wondering if anyone else had received similar messages, but everyone seemed focused on their food and conversation. She excused herself and stepped outside into the cooling evening air. The restaurant parking lot was nearly empty, just a few vehicles scattered across the asphalt. She stared at the phone number in the message for a long moment, then pressed call before she could overthink it. The line rang twice before a crisp female voice answered. "Colonel Hendricks." Elena cleared her throat. "This is Elena Kovacs, ma'am. I just received your message." "Good," the colonel replied. "Thank you for calling back so quickly. I will get straight to the point. Your course instructor flagged your file because of several factors that caught his attention. Your mathematical aptitude, your ability to calculate solutions under pressure, and particularly your background. Your father was Captain Victor Kovacs, correct?" The mention of her father's name hit Elena like a physical blow. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. "He was. I served with your father in Afghanistan," Colonel Hendricks said. "He was one of the best precision shooters I ever worked with. More than that, he had an instinct for reading conditions that most people never develop. CWO Hendricks noted in his evaluation that you demonstrated similar capabilities, particularly in your wind calculations and environmental assessment." Elena did not know what to say. Her father had rarely talked about his service, and she had no idea he had worked with special operations units. The colonel continued, "We have a situation developing that requires someone with precision shooting skills and the ability to operate under extreme pressure. I cannot provide details over the phone, but I can tell you this would be a temporary assignment, approximately 6 months, and it would involve working with a small team in a challenging environment. Your clearance would need to be upgraded, and you would need to report for additional training within 2 weeks." "Ma'am," Elena said, trying to organize her thoughts. "I just completed the Precision Marksman course. I barely passed the final evaluation. Are you sure I'm the right person for this?" "CWO Hendricks does not flag people lightly," the colonel replied. "He told me you struggled early, but showed consistent improvement and demonstrated composure during the cold bore shot that most trainees do not possess. More importantly, he said you reminded him of your father, and that is not a comparison he makes casually." Elena leaned against the restaurant wall, her mind racing. 2 weeks ago, she had been fighting just to pass the basic course. Now she was being recruited for a specialized role she knew nothing about, based partly on skills she was not sure she fully possessed and partly on her father's reputation. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "I understand," Colonel Hendricks replied, "but I need an answer within 24 hours. If you decline, I have 2 other candidates I can approach." The mission timeline is fixed, and we need someone committed and ready to train. Call this number tomorrow before 1800 hours with your decision." The call ended. Elena stood in the parking lot for several minutes, staring at the desert horizon. Inside the restaurant, her fellow trainees were celebrating their success, looking forward to leave time and rest. She could join them, take the easy path, return to her regular unit with her new certification, and let that be enough. Or she could accept this opportunity, whatever it was, and find out if she was actually capable of more than barely passing an evaluation. When she returned to the table, Tomas looked at her with concern. "Everything okay?" he asked. Elena nodded, sliding back in her seat. "Just a call I needed to take. Work stuff." The conversation continued around her, but she barely heard it. Her mind was already working through the decision, weighing risks and possibilities. By the time they left the restaurant an hour later, she had not reached a conclusion. The question followed her back to the barracks, through her final night at the facility, into her restless attempts at sleep. Morning came too quickly. Elena completed her out-processing paperwork in the administration building, turning in her range equipment and receiving her travel orders. The 9 certified shooters were scattering in different directions, some heading to new assignments, others returning home. Voss left early without saying goodbye to anyone. Tomas shook her hand and told her to stay in touch. By noon, Elena was sitting in her truck in the facility parking lot, her gear loaded in the back, the engine running. She still had not made a decision about Colonel Hendricks' offer. The safe choice was obvious. Go home, take leave, let someone else handle whatever specialized mission required urgent recruitment. But she thought about her father, about the hours he had spent teaching her to shoot, the patience he had shown when she struggled, the pride in his eyes when she succeeded. She thought about C.W.O. Hendricks telling her she reminded him of her father, a comparison that carried weight she was only beginning to understand. She pulled out her phone and dialed the colonel's number. The call was answered on the first ring. "Colonel Hendricks, this is Elena Kovacs. I am calling with my decision." The colonel waited in silence, giving her space to commit. Elena took a breath and let it out slowly, the same breathing technique she used before taking a long-distance shot. "I accept the assignment," she said. "When do you need me to report?" There was a hint of satisfaction in the colonel's voice when she replied. "Outstanding. Check your email within the hour for orders and reporting instructions. Welcome to the team, Kovacs. Your father would be proud." The call ended. Elena sat in her truck for another moment, processing what she had just committed to. Then she put the vehicle in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the precision marksman facility behind. The desert stretched ahead of her, vast and open, full of possibility and uncertainty. Whatever came next, whatever this assignment involved, she would face it the same way she had faced the past weeks. With determination, with careful calculation, and with the knowledge that she was capable of more than she had believed possible. The evaluation had proven she could shoot at long distance. Now she would discover what else she could do when the stakes were even higher and the pressure even more intense. 2 weeks later, Elena stood on a different range at a facility whose name did not appear on any map. The buildings here looked weathered and nondescript from the outside, designed to blend into the Virginia countryside. But inside, the equipment was state-of-the-art, and the shooters working the various ranges moved with a level of proficiency that made her precision marksman course seem like basic training. Colonel Sarah Hendricks had met her on arrival, a tall woman in her late 40s with gray, threading through dark hair and eyes that assessed everything with tactical precision. The resemblance to C.W.O. Hendricks was striking, and Elena learned they were cousins, both from a family with deep military roots. "Your father and I worked together for 3 years," the colonel explained as they walked through the facility. He was part of a special reconnaissance unit that required long-range observation and precision fire support. One of the best I have ever seen at reading terrain and environmental conditions. He could make shots that other people would not even attempt. Elena absorbed this information, pieces of her father's past clicking into place. He had always deflected questions about his deployments, changing the subject or offering vague generalities. Now she understood why. The work he had done was not something that could be discussed casually. The colonel led her to a briefing room where two other people waited. One was a man in his 30s with the lean build of a distance runner, introduced as Captain James Reeve. The other was a woman slightly older than Elena, with sharp features and calculating eyes, Staff Sergeant Nadia Volkov. "You three will be working together for the next 6 months," Colonel Hendricks said. "The mission is observation and intelligence gathering in a region I cannot specify until your clearances are finalized. What I can tell you is that it requires shooters who can operate at extreme distances with minimal support. Captain Reeve will lead the team. Sergeant Volkov is our senior spotter and communications specialist. Kovacs, you are here because we need someone who can make calculations under pressure and adapt to changing conditions quickly." Over the next week, Elena trained with Reeve and Volkov, learning to work as a cohesive unit. The dynamic was different from the competitive atmosphere of the precision marksman course. Here, success depended on trust and coordination. Reeve shot with mechanical consistency, his technique textbook perfect. Volkov provided spotting solutions with frightening accuracy, her ability to read wind and mirage bordering on supernatural. But it was during a training evolution at 1,500 meters that something shifted. They were practicing with the MRAD rifle system, a precision weapon that Elena had only fired a few times during her previous course. The range conditions were challenging, wind gusting unpredictably across a complex valley terrain. Reeve took the first shot and missed by 2 feet. Volkov provided a correction, but the second shot was also off. They spent several minutes trying to solve the wind problem without success, frustration creeping into their usually professional demeanor. Elena studied the terrain carefully, noticing something the others had not mentioned. There was a rock formation at mid-range, creating a Venturi effect, accelerating wind through a narrow gap. The flags at the firing line and near the target showed one condition, but the bullet was traveling through a completely different wind environment in the middle of its flight. She explained her observation to Volkov, who looked skeptical but adjusted her spotting solution based on Elena's analysis. Reeve fired again, and this time the bullet impacted center mass of the target. "Good call," Volkov said, her tone carrying new respect. "How did you catch that?" "My father taught me to read terrain as much as wind flags," Elena replied. "He said the land tells you what the air is doing if you know how to look." Over the following days, Elena found herself contributing more to the team's success. Her mathematical aptitude allowed her to make quick corrections when conditions changed. Her ability to read terrain features that affected wind made their solutions more accurate. Slowly, she felt the dynamic shifting from her being the junior member who had barely qualified to being an equal contributor. 3 weeks into the assignment, Colonel Hendricks called them in for a mission briefing. The clearances had been finalized, and now they could learn what they would actually be doing. The briefing room darkened as satellite imagery appeared on the screen, showing a mountainous region that Elena recognized from news reports. "Your mission is pure observation and intelligence gathering," the colonel explained. "You will establish a position in this valley with clear lines of sight to several key locations. Your job is to watch, record, and report. Engagement is only authorized in defense of your position or to prevent imminent loss of civilian life." She clicked through more images, showing the terrain they would be working in. Distances to observation points ranged from 800 to 2,000 meters. Conditions would be extreme, with high altitude, variable weather, and limited resupply. "This is a 6-month deployment," she continued. "Once you are in position, you will have minimal contact with command. You need to be self-sufficient, adaptable, and above all, patient. Most days will involve watching and waiting. But when action is required, there will be no margin for error." Elena studied the images, her mind already calculating the challenges. Wind patterns in mountain valleys were notoriously difficult. Temperature variations between day and night would affect trajectories. Humidity changes with weather systems would alter bullet performance. This would test every skill she had developed and many she had not yet mastered. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering logistics, communications protocols, emergency extraction procedures. When it ended, the three of them walked out into the afternoon sunlight, each processing the reality of what they had just committed to. 6 months in a hostile environment, Reeves said quietly. Long time to be that isolated. Volkov shrugged. Better than being in an office pushing papers. This is actual work. Elena said nothing, but her mind was already preparing. She thought about her father, about the years he had spent doing similar work without ever mentioning it. Had he felt this same mixture of anxiety and determination? Had he questioned whether he was ready for what lay ahead? That evening, she called her mother from a secure phone in the facility. She could not explain where she was or what she would be doing, could only say she had accepted a special assignment that would keep her out of contact for several months. Her mother's voice carried worry and pride in equal measure. "Be careful," she said. "Whatever you are doing, remember what your father always told you. Trust your training and trust yourself." After the call ended, Elena sat in her temporary quarters and opened the notebook containing her father's lessons. She had carried it through the precision marksman course and brought it here, a connection to the man who had prepared her for this path without her understanding it at the time. On the last page, she found something she had not noticed before. A short note written in her father's handwriting, dated just a month before his death. "For Elena, when she is ready. The work we do in shadows matters as much as what happens in daylight. Calculate carefully, shoot true, and never forget that precision is not just about the shot, but about knowing when to take it." She read the words several times, understanding now that he had known she would follow this path eventually. Had prepared her not just with technical skills, but with the mindset needed to succeed in places where most people would never know she had been. The next morning, training intensified. They practiced long-range shooting in rain, in darkness, in wind that would make most shooters pack up and go home. They ran scenarios where equipment failed and had to be repaired in the field. They learned to calculate solutions without electronic aids, relying only on basic tools and mental math. Elena pushed herself harder than she had during the precision marksman course, knowing that barely passing was not an option anymore. Lives might depend on her ability to make accurate calculations and deliver precise shots under conditions that would test every limit she possessed. For weeks after arriving at the facility, Colonel Hendricks informed them their deployment date had been set. They would leave in 72 hours. Final equipment checks, last briefings, and then they would disappear into the mountains for 6 months of work that would never be publicly acknowledged. Elena spent that evening writing letters to her mother, to be delivered if something went wrong during the deployment. She tried to explain what her father had meant to her, how his lessons had shaped her into someone capable of doing this work. She thanked her mother for supporting her even when the path seemed unclear. But mostly, she wrote about feeling ready, about understanding now why her father had spent so many hours teaching her to read wind and calculate trajectories. He had seen something in her, some capacity for this particular type of service, and had prepared her as best he could within the limits of what he could openly discuss. The letter sealed and filed with the colonel's administrative staff, Elena returned to her quarters and began the final preparation of her equipment. Every item checked and rechecked. Every calculation verified. Every skill rehearsed one more time in her mind. In 72 hours, she would discover if she was truly her father's daughter, if the precision marksman certification had been just the beginning of proving what she was capable of achieving. The mission lasted exactly 173 days, though Elena stopped counting after the first month. The mountain position they established offered clear observation of the target areas, but the conditions tested every skill she possessed. Wind patterns shifted hourly. Temperature swings of 40 degrees between day and night changed trajectory calculations constantly. The altitude made every physical task harder, breathing thin and labored even after weeks of acclimatization. But the team functioned with increasing efficiency. Reeve led with quiet competence, making decisions that kept them safe while accomplishing the mission objectives. Volkov proved to be not just an excellent spotter, but someone who could find humor even in the most austere conditions, her dry commentary breaking tension during long observation periods. And Elena discovered that her ability to read terrain and calculate solutions quickly made her indispensable when conditions were most challenging. The moment that defined the deployment came on day 142. Intelligence indicated a high-value target would be traveling through their observation area, someone whose capture was critical to ongoing operations. The plan called for ground forces to intercept, but the timeline was uncertain and weather was deteriorating rapidly. Elena was on observation duty when the convoy appeared, earlier than expected and moving faster than predicted. She immediately called Reeve and Volkov to the position. Within minutes, they confirmed the target vehicle and began tracking its movement through the valley below. "Ground forces are still 20 minutes out," Reeve said, monitoring the radio. "Weather is shutting down helicopter support. If this convoy makes it through the valley, we lose them for weeks." The decision fell to Reeve, but Elena saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. They had authorization to engage to prevent imminent threat or if the tactical situation demanded it. This was not technically either scenario, but it was an opportunity that would not come again. "Kovacs," Reeve said quietly. "What is the shot?" Elena was already running calculations. The lead vehicle was at 1,900 meters and moving, the most difficult shot she had ever faced. Wind was gusting from multiple directions as storm fronts collided over the valley. The target would be in her sight picture for perhaps 2 minutes before terrain blocked the shot. "Conditions are terrible," she said honestly. "Wind is variable, hard to predict. Moving target at extreme range. Success probability is maybe 40%. Reeve looked at Volkov, who was studying the scene through her spotting scope. "I can give you a solution," Volkov said. "But Elena is right about the conditions. This is at the edge of possible." They had trained for this scenario, but had never executed it for real. Elena felt her pulse steady rather than accelerate, a calm settling over her that she recognized from her father's lessons. This was what all the preparation had been for. Not the shots that were easy or certain, but the ones that mattered when conditions were terrible and the stakes were highest. "I can make the shot," Elena heard herself say. The words came out with more confidence than she felt, but once spoken, they became true. She could make this shot because she had to, because everything she had learned and practiced demanded she try. "Take it," Reeve said. Elena settled behind the MRAD rifle, the weapon that had become an extension of herself over the past months. Volkov fed her data in a steady stream. Range 1,900 meters. Target speed approximately 40 kilometers per hour. Wind 10 to 15 knots variable from northwest. Temperature dropping as the storm front approached. But Elena was also reading the terrain, seeing things the instruments could not measure. The way wind accelerated through the narrow section of valley. The updrafts created by temperature differentials. The bullet would travel for nearly 3 seconds, enough time for conditions to change mid-flight. She made her calculations, adjusted for movement, added compensation for the factors she could see but not quantify. The math was complex, but her mind processed it with the speed that came from thousands of repetitions. She held for a point in space where the vehicle would be when the bullet arrived, accounting for its movement and all the forces that would affect the shot. Her breathing slowed. The crosshairs tracked the lead vehicle smoothly, her body moving with it naturally. She felt the trigger pressure building, knew exactly when it would break. The shot had to happen in the next 5 seconds, or the angle would become impossible. The rifle fired. Through the scope, Elena tracked the vehicle, watching, calculating, knowing she had done everything right, but unable to control what happened next. 3 seconds felt like 3 hours. The impact was not visible at first. Then the lead vehicle's front tire exploded, the vehicle swerving violently and rolling onto its side. The convoy behind it came to a chaotic stop, exactly where ground forces could intercept when they arrived minutes later. "Hit," Volkov said quietly, something like awe in her voice. Dead center of the tire at 1,900 meters on a moving target in terrible conditions. That was impossible. Elena cleared her rifle, her hands steady. "Not impossible," she said. "Just difficult." Reeve was already on the radio, coordinating with ground forces who were now racing to exploit the opportunity Elena had created. When he finished, he turned to look at her with an expression that held new respect. "Your father would have been proud of that shot," he said. "Hell, I'm not sure even he could have made it." The mission continued for another month after that day, returning to routine observation and reporting. But something had changed in how the team functioned. Elena was no longer the junior member who had barely qualified for the course. She was a precision shooter who had proven herself under conditions that demanded everything she had learned and more. When they finally extracted from the mountains and returned to the facility, Colonel Hendricks was waiting. The debrief took 2 days, going through every significant event of the deployment. When they reached the engagement at day 142, the colonel studied Elena with those assessing eyes. "The shot has been reviewed at the highest levels," she said. 1,900 meters, moving target, terrible conditions. Command wants to know if it was skill or luck. Elena thought about her father, about the hours spent learning to read wind and grass and terrain features, about CWO Hendricks pushing her to trust her calculations even when they seemed impossible, about every instructor who had taught her that precision was not about perfection, but about managing variables and making the best possible decision with incomplete information. "It was preparation meeting opportunity," she said finally. "Everything I learned came together in that moment. The shot was possible because I was ready for it." The colonel nodded slowly. "That is the right answer. Skill and luck are not opposites. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and you prepared yourself to be lucky when it mattered." The deployment officially ended, and the team dispersed to new assignments. Reeve was heading to an instructor position where he would train other shooters. Volkov had orders for another specialized unit that needed her particular skills. Elena received several options, including a position as an instructor at the precision marksman course where her journey had begun. But there was another option, one that Colonel Hendricks presented privately: advanced assignments that would take her to places even more remote and challenging. Missions that required not just shooting skills, but the ability to think independently and operate with minimal support. The kind of work her father had done for years without recognition or acknowledgement. Elena accepted without hesitation. She had discovered what she was capable of achieving, had proven that barely passing an evaluation was just the beginning of discovering her potential. Whatever came next, she would face it with the confidence that came from knowing she could make the impossible shot when everything was on the line. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or share if you have known someone who proved their doubters wrong against all odds. 6 months later, Elena found herself on another range in another undisclosed location, training for another mission that would never be publicly discussed. She pulled out the notebook containing her father's lessons, now augmented with her own notes and observations from the field. On a blank page, she wrote a new entry, recording the lessons she had learned about reading mountain wind and making calculations at extreme distance. Someday, she thought, perhaps she would have a daughter or son who needed these lessons. Someone who would struggle and doubt themselves, but who possessed the capacity for precision under pressure. When that time came, she would be ready to pass forward what her father had given her, preparing the next generation for challenges they could not yet imagine. The afternoon sun painted the range in golden light, flags stirring in the constant wind. Elena settled behind her rifle and looked through the scope at a target 2,000 meters away, a distance that would have seemed impossible when she first arrived at the precision marksman course. Now it was just another shot, another calculation, another opportunity to prove that preparation and determination could overcome any obstacle. She made her wind call, adjusted her scope, and pressed the trigger. The rifle fired, the bullet traveling its long arc through the mountain air. Through the scope, she watched the impact appear exactly where her calculations predicted it would be. Center mass. Perfect execution. Not impossible, just difficult. And she was ready for difficult. She had been preparing for it her entire life without fully understanding until the moment arrived when everything she had learned came together and made the difference between success and failure. That was the real lesson her father had taught her. Not just how to shoot, but how to become the person who could make the shot when it mattered most. And that was a lesson she would carry forward into whatever challenges lay ahead. Elena's name echoed across the range, pulling her back from the edge of panic that had been building in her chest. She stepped to the firing line, acutely aware of every eye watching her approach. The rifle felt heavier than it should in her hands, the weight magnified by the pressure of the moment. She had trained for this, had spent months preparing. But standing here now, with the entire course watching and judging, all that preparation felt suddenly inadequate. She set up her equipment at Station 7 with hands that wanted to shake but did not, muscle memory carrying her through the familiar routine. Adjust the bipod legs. Settle the rifle into the rest. Check the scope one more time, even though she had already verified it 3 times. Anything to delay the moment when she would have to actually shoot and prove whether she belonged here or not. The 200-meter target looked absurdly close compared to the distances she had practiced at home in Montana. Her father had trained her at ranges out to 600 meters, working from the rickety bench he had built on their property. She could still hear his voice, patient and steady, talking her through wind calls and breathing techniques. But he was not here now. She was alone with her doubts and the weight of expectations she was terrified of failing to meet. "Kovacs," Chief Warrant Officer Hendricks called out. "You have 5 shots. Begin when ready." Elena settled behind the rifle, pressing her cheek against the stock. Through the scope, the target filled her view, the concentric rings sharp and clear in the afternoon light. No excuses about visibility or conditions. This was as straightforward as a shooting test could be. If she missed, it would be entirely her own failure. She forced her breathing to slow, counting the rhythm her father had taught her. In for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Out for 4. The crosshairs steadied slightly, but still wavered more than they should. She was gripping the rifle too tightly, trying to force it to stay still instead of letting it settle naturally. The first shot surprised her, breaking before she was ready. Through the scope, she saw the impact, low and left, completely missing the target. Not even close. A wave of heat flooded her face as she heard the murmur from the other trainees. She had just proven exactly what they expected. She could not shoot under pressure. Elena worked the bolt, chambering another round. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline making everything harder. She tried to reset mentally, to start over with better fundamentals, but the knowledge that she had already missed once made the second shot feel even more critical, more impossible. The second shot went high, catching nothing but air above the target frame. 2 misses. She had 3 rounds left to salvage something from this disaster. Around her, she could feel the judgment crystallizing into certainty. She was going to fail. They had all known it from the moment she arrived. Focus, she told herself. Just focus on the next shot. Not the misses. Not the watching eyes. Not the mockery that would come after. Just this one shot, this one moment. She slowed her breathing again, forced her grip to relax. The crosshairs settled over the target center. This time she waited for the shot to break naturally, letting the trigger surprise her instead of anticipating it. The rifle fired. The impact appeared in the outer ring of the target. Not good, but at least it was a hit. Her 4th shot also found the target, barely, catching the edge of the scoring area. The 5th shot missed again, her growing desperation causing her to rush the trigger press. When she cleared her rifle and stood, her legs felt unsteady. 3 misses out of 5 shots at 200 meters. A performance so poor that several trainees were openly laughing now. She walked back from the firing line with her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The other shooters resumed their own strings of fire, the sharp reports of rifles punctuating the afternoon air. Elena found a spot near the equipment shed where she could watch without being conspicuous, trying to understand what had gone so wrong. The other trainees were hitting consistently. Not perfect scores necessarily, but solid performances that demonstrated competence. She watched their technique, searching for differences that might explain the gap between their success and her failure. They seemed more relaxed, more confident. Their movements were fluid where hers had been rigid and forced. When the last shooter finished, Hendricks gathered everyone for his assessment. His pale eyes moved across the group with methodical precision, lingering on each person for a moment before moving on. When his gaze found Elena, there was no sympathy in his expression, just clinical evaluation. Day 1 separates those who can execute fundamentals under observation from those who cannot, he said flatly. Some of you performed a standard. Some exceeded it. And some demonstrated that you have significant work to do if you intend to remain in this course. He did not name names, but everyone knew who he meant. Elena felt the weight of failure settling over her like a physical burden. She had traveled across 3 states to attend this course, had convinced herself she was ready, had believed that her father's training would be enough to see her through. All of that confidence had evaporated in 5 terrible shots that proved she was not prepared for this level of competition. The formation broke up, trainees heading to the armory to return their weapons before evening chow. Elena moved with the group, but apart from it, isolated by her poor performance. She heard fragments of conversation around her, people comparing scores and discussing their technique. No one spoke to her directly, and she was grateful for the invisibility even as it confirmed her outsider status. At the armory, she cleaned her rifle with meticulous care, the familiar task offering temporary refuge from the shame of failure. The weapon had functioned perfectly. The problem was entirely with the shooter. She had let pressure override training, had allowed doubt to poison her execution. Her father would have recognized the symptoms immediately and known how to correct them. But her father was not here, and she would have to find her own way forward. Evening formation brought more administrative details about the training schedule. Physical training at dawn. Classroom instruction mid-morning. Live fire in the afternoon when conditions were most challenging. Weekends were technically free time, but Hendricks made it clear that most successful students spent their off hours practicing and preparing. After formation, Elena walked to the small barracks room she had been assigned. The space was austere, just a bed, a desk, and a wall locker for her gear. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, replaying the days shooting over and over in her mind. Each miss felt worse in retrospect, more damning, more proof that she did not belong. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Hope your first day went well. Thinking of you." Elena stared at the screen, trying to decide how to respond. She could lie, say everything was fine, protect her mother from worry. Or she could admit the truth, that she had failed spectacularly in front of everyone and was already questioning whether she should quit before the embarrassment got worse. She typed back, "First day was challenging. Learning a lot. We'll call this weekend." Not quite a lie, but not the full truth either. A middle ground that bought her time to figure out if she could salvage the situation or if she should accept defeat and go home before wasting more time and effort on something she clearly was not capable of achieving. The mess hall served dinner from 1700 to 1800 hours. Elena waited until the last possible minute to go, hoping to avoid the crowded rush. When she finally entered, most people had already eaten and left. She collected a tray of food she had no appetite for and found a table in the corner where she could eat alone. But solitude did not last. 3 trainees approached her table, and Elena recognized them immediately. The buzz-cut man from this morning, whose name she had learned was Garrett Voss, and his 2 constant companions. They sat down without asking permission, their body language aggressive and mocking. "Rough day out there," Voss said, his tone falsely sympathetic. 200 meters is supposed to be the easy one. Wait until we get to real distances." One of his friends laughed. Maybe she was aiming at a different target, like the one in the next county. Elena kept her eyes on her food, refusing to engage. Responding would only make it worse, give them more ammunition. She had dealt with bullies before and knew that showing emotion was exactly what they wanted. Seriously, though, Voss continued, leaning forward. "Why are you even here? This is not a beginner course. If you cannot hit at 200 meters, what makes you think you can handle 600 or 1,000? You are wasting everyone's time, including your own." The words stung because they echoed her own doubts. She had been asking herself the same questions for the past 3 hours, but hearing someone else voice them turning her private fears into public judgment, made them somehow more real and more cutting. She stood up, leaving most of her food untouched. "I am here because I earned my place in this course," she said quietly. "Just like you did." Voss smirked. "Difference is I can actually shoot. You should probably pack your bags now and save yourself the embarrassment of washing out later." Elena walked away without responding, her face burning with shame and anger. Back in her room, she locked the door and sat at the small desk. Her data book lay open, the page from today's shooting showing the brutal reality in stark numbers. 3 hits, 3 misses, all at the shortest distance they would shoot during the entire course. She pulled out the worn notebook that contained her father's lessons, the observations and techniques he had shared during their training sessions. Page after page of his handwriting, patient explanations of wind reading and trajectory calculation. He had believed in her abilities, had told her more than once that she had natural instinct for reading conditions and making adjustments. But instinct was not enough when pressure transformed her into someone who could not execute basic fundamentals. She needed to find a way to translate what she knew into performance when it mattered. Tomorrow would bring another chance to shoot, another opportunity to prove herself or confirm that she did not belong here. The question was whether she had the courage to face that test again after today's failure, or whether Voss was right and she should quit now before the humiliation deepened.